Hey guys, welcome out to Revolution this morning. I'm going to be examining a video that TurretinFan has done. Now, I just realized only just a few minutes ago that the debate between Stephen Boyce and Will Kinney is going to be live in about an hour. So I thought, well, I'll try and rush through this because usually I blabber on and talk about all sorts of things. But I thought I'll just get straight to the point with this video. And this is a part one. And so I can always add a little bit to it later and do a part two, part three, however many parts it takes. And so with TurretinFan, so what he's been doing, making a bunch of videos. So you can see if you go to TurretinFan and go to his live videos, he has his recent one is Easter and the King James Version, some responses to Nick Sayers, KJV debate review continuation, a minor mistranslation of the King James Version at Mark 6:20, God forbid. So these are issues that he brought up. So obviously, if you've been following what I've been doing recently, TurretinFan's done about 10 videos on unicorn. And so explaining all those things and going through them. And so, the first one he does here is the marginal readings in the King James. And so I showed TurretinFan where I had done 3 videos on the marginal readings and where people assume that they're alternate readings. And nowhere in the King James version preface does it say alternate readings. And so what I find critical text people or people who just are against the King James, because you can get TR people who are against the King James. They're promoting other TR editions, or they're for the New King James or whatever. And so, but I just find that they read through the preface and they dig out whatever they want to. They see what they want to see. It clearly says diversity of senses, and so if you've done any type of study into the marginal notes in the King James Version without a bias, without just saying, oh, it's almost the exact opposite thing being said here, or it's just an alternative reading. The translators didn't know what they were doing. They were just like, oh, I don't know, just put something else in the margin, and they can choose between 2 options, sort of thing. Most of the time, the marginal notes are there for specific purposes, and each one has to be taken in its individual context. And so obviously this plays in with the King James having rhinoceros there, but I've looked into many of these marginal notes, done in-depth studies into them, and I just find that what TurretinFan is saying about these marginal notes is quite it's quite sophomore-ish. It's just very it's a drive by cursory sort of look at the issue instead of going through each individual time. And even where it has rhinoceros, I pointed out that there was this one issue. I might just quickly get this up where KJV Isaiah 3:4-7, I think it is where the marginal note is. Isaiah chapter 34. So let's just jump here. Here it has all rhinoceros here. But as I was just showing to him, half the time, people say, oh, this is an alternative reading. And even both of them are wrong, so they're no matter what the King James translators did, they were wrong, according to critical text people. But here it has or drunken. Okay, and so I've been listening to TurretinFan's videos, but he's done quite a few of them, so some things might slip my mind. Now, where it has all drunken here, clearly, and I think I pointed this out even in the debate, or it might have been just in one of the videos just quickly after it, where it has, and their land shall be soaked with blood. So obviously, if it's land, it's going to be soaked with blood. It's not going to be drunk. And the thing is, the word drunk has a different connotation today. We think of drunk, someone's drunk with alcohol. Okay, if I have, I've got a water with a Barocca in it here. If I have, 2 or 3 glasses of this, I'm well drunk with water and Barocca. It doesn't mean I'm taking alcohol. You know what I mean? And so that was one of the things I felt TurretinFan was sort of like drunken. It means you're drunk. If you're reading the King James long enough, you understand what this word means. You can. That's why it says you're drunken with the blood of the saints. It doesn't mean you're sloshing around like a drunkard. It means you've had a lot of it. And there is a double-stroked marginal note here that so it says soaked with blood. So obviously the ground will be soaked with blood, but in the Hebrew and in many other languages, oftentimes they don't make any distinction between objects that are living and objects that are non-living. So here it talks about the ground, the land being soaked with blood. Now, if someone's shirt was soaked with blood, or someone's, your carpet was soaked with blood, you wouldn't say it's my shirt drank up all the blood. You might say that in a roundabout way, but it's not usually the way we speak. Usually, a dog or a cow or some sort of animal or a human would drink up that. And so that's all it's saying here, is that basically the Hebrew is pointing to there's 2 different ways that you can say this. If you're talking in the context of something like land, obviously it's going to soak up the blood. If you're talking in the context of an animal, obviously it's going to drink up the blood. But they're both it soaked and drink in is they're basically synonyms. And so this is the thing. I just find he's just avoiding these double line marginal notes. And so when you go through them, many times they are just explaining with greater detail what is happening here. It's not just an alternative reading, because here, what would an alternative reading be? And the land shall be drunken with blood. And so, getting away from that era of thinking drunken always means, you've had alcohol. The land shall be, the thirsty land shall be quenched, sort of thing. It's like the land shall be soaked, or shall have had a lot of blood to drink. Like you wouldn't say that about the land. In English, we specifically talk about animals, drinking in. We talk about land, and we talk about inanimate objects being soaked. So that's all it's saying. And so you can clearly see it's a synonym. And this is in the same verse. You don't have to go far. You don't have to do a huge study into it. It's quite obvious. To me, it's just absolutely quite obvious. And going through the marginal note thing, I didn't really think it was worthy of another video. It was just sort of like, okay, that's your point of view. I don't think it's a great argument. So then he's done the God forbid thing. Now, all I have to do with the God forbid thing is just go to KJV.net. It's KJV today. And God forbid, or may it not be. Now, I actually read this in the debate, but it just seems to be avoided. That Dan Wallace, he clearly says in his Greek grammar Beyond the Basics at 481, I read this out. During the debate. So what I might do, I might just, other than me reading through it, because I'm actually a little bit tired and I know I'll stumble over some of these words here. But I'll just grab Balabolka up and let's just see what Dan Wallace says here.
The voluntative optative seems to be used this way in the language of prayer. Again, as with mu eta gamma epsilon nu omicron iota tau omicron, it is largely a carryover from Attic, even though its meaning has changed. This is not due to any substantive change in syntax, but is rather due to a change in theological perspective. Prayers offered to the semi-gods of ancient Athens could expect to be haggled over, rebuffed, and left unanswered. But the God of the NT was bigger than that. The prayers offered to him depend on his sovereignty and goodness. Thus, although the form of much prayer language in the NT has the tinge of remote possibility, when it is offered to the God who raised Jesus Christ from the dead, its meaning often moves into the realm of expectation. If uncertainty is part of the package, it is not due to questions of God's ability, but simply to the petitioner's humility before the transcendent one.
Okay, so Dan Wallace clearly talks about this. Let's make a noito. So I'll just jump on here again. Sorry if it's annoying to hear that. I might actually slow it down. It's a little bit fast. I tend to listen to this on a 0.2, which is a bit fast. So let's go through this.
Contrary to what many critics believe, the idiom, God forbid, did not originate in English. It is an idiom of biblical Hebrew origin, first introduced in 1 Samuel 24:6, the Lord forbid that I should do this thing. ESV, NIV. Thus the idiom has biblical precedent and is legitimate. The charge, however, is that the word God, theta epsilon omicron, is not in the Greek mu eta gamma epsilon nu omicron iota tau omicron in Romans 3:4 and elsewhere. The Greek literally says become, optative, not. However, the verb in the optative mood expresses a strong negative wish in the strongest of terms, even invoking a prayer.
And so I think really, my answer in the debate was pointing to what Dan Wallace says about this and also to this article. So it would make more sense for TurretinFan to go through this article. And that was one of the things that I found even with the unicorn issue. I clearly pointed to the KJV Today article of unicorn. And so talking about the two horns and things like that. And so when I do that, when I'm saying, okay, I recommend people to go to this article here and read through it. It's very short. But what I'm doing is I'm pointing them in a direction where it's like, well, this is what you have to refute. It's not so much, I can summarize this, and sometimes it's like I'll summarize it and I'll say a little bit of stuff on the side, and that's what gets focused on. It's like, well, just deal with the main things. Focus on this. Why can't you see this? Why can't you see that this is what would be convincing to me, or to almost everyone that I know who is on the King James side agrees with this, and this obviously would point to why there is the issue of pluralization and plural horns and things like that. And so so that's another issue. So yeah, God forbid. And then the minor mistranslation at Mark 6:20. I'm pretty sure this is just thoroughly answered. There wasn't really anything that sparked any thoughts when I was listening to TurretinFan. It was just sort of like he was just rehashing over the top of it. And one of the things is I just sort of find the whole thing of the point one being imprint errors. But I know he admits no one is worried about that, but it keeps getting brought up. And so it's sort of like if I said, well, some critical text people believe that Codex Sinaiticus was flown down from a UFO. Now, I don't really know anyone who believes that. I don't know anyone who defends that. Fortunately, TurretinFan doesn't believe that. Fortunately, he's one of those people who doesn't believe that, even though you don't know anyone. The thing is, no one believes that. It's just, so why even talk about it? Even when the debate was on, it was like, oh, okay, so we're going to go that route, where it's sort of like the Ankerberg show, old debunked 1990s thing of just having, what about the wicked Bible? And what about, all these stupid arguments? And I just find even just bringing this issue up, it's like, why are you bringing this issue up? And why then even when it's brought up, and I'm like, that's not an issue. I don't know anyone who believes that. And TurretinFan's like, neither do I. But then it keeps getting brought up because it's a good tool to go, oh, well, a TurretinFan, he mightn't, thankfully, he doesn't think that a UFO brought Codex Sinaiticus down on a cloud with aliens. Thankfully. He hasn't gone that far yet. He's not like that. But you don't know anyone who does that. So why are you saying that? It's disingenuous. That's what I find. Okay, so what was I looking for? We were going through the minor mistranslation, Mark 6:20. So let's just quickly go there. Mark chapter 6 and verse 20. Okay. And it's pretty obvious what I believe here. The 1611 King James Version has the reading observed with the footnote, or kept him or saved him. So let's have a look at that. 6:20. So notice this other footnote. Oops, it's up here. Here. Or kept him or saved him. Okay. So he observed him, or he kept him or saved him. So kept would be in that context of you guard someone and you can save someone. Sorry about if you can hear me gargling and burping. I've just had a Barocca, which I'm not sure if you have them in the United States. They're like a vitamin tablet. It was very strong. Or kept him or saved him. So kept, now obviously these words, even today, and we don't even have to go back to 1611. Even today, if I keep a prisoner under observation, I'm in an observation deck looking down on a prisoner. I'm keeping my eye on him. I'm guarding him. And when it says kept him or saved him, saving is just like preserving him. And so because people want to kill this guy, so it's like, well, so you don't even have to like it. See, this is one of the things that I brought out, and I might even just read this because I explain it. So it has the footnote, kept him or saved him. The Oxford English Dictionary has the meaning observe as to guard or to keep. It's like, it's just look up it in the dictionary. It's, and this is the thing. TurretinFan's brought out his argument points before we had the debate. So this is planned topics. And so I went through these and just went, okay, let's have a look. And it was these, I just found there was only like about 3 or 4 that were of any substance. The rest of them were just sort of like nothings. Just a curse, just a basic bog standard dictionary. Just instantly wiped out this argument. And then I was like, oh, he's got it from James White. And so it was like, okay. So in the King James Version 2016 edition, I've got the word protected there because obviously observed in 1611 had a slightly different type of understanding than protected. Okay. So, but it is still in that same type of synonym where if you have observed someone, you've protected someone. To observe means to guard them, that means to protect, or to keep them, that means protect. So which means to be protected from harm. Although some may protest that protected is a fond nurturing concept. And so I sort of preempted that he would go this route. But many times to protect does not involve such emotions. A police officer may serve and protect the people he dislikes. You're serving and protecting people who are drunk and coming out of a nightclub, and you don't want them to get robbed. And you're like, I sort of hope they get robbed. They're they're being jerks or whatever. But you're to serve and protect. A protectorate, for example, may be a country unliked by the controlling nation. Hitler, he was using certain countries as a protectorate, or a witness protection program. May protect criminals. You might have someone who deserves to be in the electric chair, but they're under the witness protection program. You're protecting them, you're observing them, you're keeping them, you're guarding them. You can see these synonyms involved. You don't have to go far to see this. But he is making out that it's just this huge difference, and I've actually corrected it. No, in my 2016 edition, I've updated archaic terminology and some words that might be hard to understand in its context. And when I read through and I saw it had observed, I've sort of got the feeling that it's like, oh, you're just looking at him. He observed him. Okay. Where observed, obviously, back in 1611 meant to guard or to keep. It had a stronger connection with protected that we don't tend to use that much anymore. But we still do, in a sense, but not as strongly as what used to happen. So James White, in the book The King James Only Controversy, makes the false claim that the Greek simply does not mean observe. This is what he's saying. But instead it means to protect. So he's saying it doesn't mean this, it means that. But these are synonymous. One might possibly suggest that observe once meant to protect, but listen to James White's reasoning. But such seems a long stretch. It's not like I went to the dictionary and found out, or I looked at usage or whatever. Especially since the King James Version renders the same word as preserve in Matthew 9:17 and Luke 5:38. So obviously to preserve means to protect. So the King James translators knew that this Greek word meant that. So wouldn't you just look this up in an older dictionary? Wouldn't you look at the usage around 1611? A similar less than perfect translation is found in Mark 9:18. So I might just quickly look that up. So firstly, it's obvious that White is anachronistically placing a modern definition onto a 400-year-old word here. He completely fails to say where he got his information from for claiming that, but such seems a long stretch, except for his own imagination. Even the KJV footnote offers a clarifying or kept him or saved him. Secondly, while he claims the Greek simply does not mean observed, the Greek syntereo means exactly that. The English is from the Middle French observer, from Old French, from Latin observe, to watch, to note, to mark, to heed, to guard, to keep, to pay attention to regard, to comply with. From ob before severe, to keep. And so, I went read through all that etymology. But so even Bill Mounce, modern guy, critical text guy, it means to keep intact or keep safe. He has to keep safe and sound, to observe strictly. So just because he has strictly there doesn't mean that the observe isn't still a use. We observe someone strictly. If you're in Guantanamo Bay, they're observing you. You're under observation. The CCTV cameras are on you. You're being observed. But that's why it's like to observe strictly, to protect from harm, protect, Mark 6:20, to preserve in memory, to keep in mind. And even Theodore Beza, in his Latin, he has observabat. And so observo means I guard, I watch over, I heed, regard, respect, I notice, perceive, I observe, I watch, I pay attention to. So perhaps James White could do a lazy 2-minute Google search or sloppily grab a dictionary off the shelf before placing doubt over the words of Holy Scripture, because that's what his mind erroneously thinks is an error. And so I would just say to TurretinFan, like, you have not proven your point here. It's just, to me, this is just it's absolutely nothing. This is like saying joy and rejoice can't be synonyms. It's you're clutching at straws. And so anyway, then so that one's not even really worth mentioning. So then we've got a continuation of the KJV debate. So I'm pretty sure he goes to the God forbid issue. So that's what he did. Or maybe, it was translational error, the GAD thing. So I haven't really done much more study into that. So if TurretinFan goes back over that, or I might go back through some of his videos, and I'll work on that. But sometimes his videos, he's actually just going through what I've said, and it's sort of like, if you follow the crumbs of information halfway through, I'm sort of thinking, are you getting it yet? You're actually doing a study like I would do it, and this should lead you to that conclusion. But no, it's mistranslation. These are alternate readings. They're not giving clarity. They're not giving a diversity of senses. They're alternate readings. So translational errors, not corrected by the 2016 edition. Okay. And so, this is one of the things that I found disingenuous as well, was, this translator, I've corrected it in the 2016 edition because I saw that it was a wrong reading and I've corrected it, no. And it's sort of like an accusation, and I just, I can see through those things. I've been debating this stuff for 20 years on the internet. I've been running massive Facebook groups where I'm reading reams of threads where you got some King James guy arguing with some NIV guy, and they're going for it. And it's like, I see this type of just innuendo put there. Oh, you've corrected it. Oh, you're on our side. Ah, good. You agree that it's an error. It's like, no, it's an old word that we've updated. So here he's saying, we didn't correct this mistake. This is a translation mistake in Easter. And so that's what I'm going to be going through. So I've almost gone for half an hour, just sort of just warming up. And I know the Wilkini debate is coming up too. So it's going to be on in like half an hour. And I really should jump on there because... But anyway, I'll just keep going through this, so we don't need to go... Oh, actually, I opened that to have a look, but it's too late. Actually, I did open it to have a look. Let's have a look. Mark 9:18 says, wheresoever he taketh him, so anyway, I've lost my train of thought there. So let's just go back to the original Easter video here. And so this is one of the most recent ones the TurretinFan's done. And I'll just, even if I can get 10, 20 minutes of video done, and then I'm going to probably shut it down and jump on the Wilkini debate thing. And I recommend all you guys do as well, and ask really good questions. And sometimes too, it's asking the contras. Why would you think that 1 John 5:7 should be deleted when clearly there's a massive grammatical solecism if you don't have it in there? Or why do you think the last 12 verses of Mark should be deleted when it's only 2 manuscripts that don't have it and the rest do? And asking these type of questions. And so what you're doing is you're debating as well. And so, okay, so let's just start here. I'll go through some of these. We've got Alec Cox. He says, hello, Nick. Hey, Alec. You can't get Lucozade here in the US. I've made my own lemon, lime, and bitters as well. Okay. Yeah, so this is like a Barocca, orange and mango flavor. Gives you a bunch of vitamins. I was, having Red Bulls and things like that, but that they're just absolutely terrible for your health. And so I've been off caffeine and any type of caffeine product for months now, which is good. I just sort of plan on just sort of cutting right off all that. Anything that you feel like you're obligated to have before you do things, it's like, I don't need that, so just cut it out. It's a little funny. So Helg, hey Helg, sorry I didn't say hello there. It's a little funny. Suddenly, when he's analysing the KJV, TurretinFan doesn't understand English very well. So it's his bias and modern versions concept thinking which is leading him. Yeah. It's his bias and his modern version concept thinking which is leading him. And that's this is one of the things where when he was going through his list, I was just sort of like, well, these are just James White bullet points. It's like he's just gone through James White's book and just gone, oh, okay, well, that sounds good. And not really understanding that most of these have been refuted like 15 years ago to, online. And half the time in other books, they've been refuted, 20, when the book came out, so 95. So anyway, let's just start.
Setting things up. It could be nice to have a little buffer.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am trying out starting without the countdown today, but probably go back to using the countdown again. I'm also considering going to a longer countdown just to let people hear what's going on and also to avoid this kind of delay where I'm setting things up. It could be nice to have a little buffer that allows me more time to set up the comments, make sure the audio is working, all those sorts of things.
So I'll just speed through this.
Maybe taking a short break from recording, like a week or so. We will see about that as well. No promises one way or another. So for tonight's episode, the plan is to respond to certain things that Hixson has to say about the subject of Easter. So Easter is an important subject for lots of reasons, but the main reason that I want to discuss Easter is because the King James Version anachronistically and inaccurately translated the word that should have been translated as Passover by the word Easter.
So I noticed that TurretinFan was going with James White's material, and James White uses the word anachronistic there, and it's quite strange because TurretinFan is still using that term anachronistic, which James White uses, but James White uses that term because he thinks it's a pagan festival. So he thinks it's a pagan holiday that was around, and then the Christians have sort of adopted, this pagan festival and called it Easter, and then put it in the Bible. So that's why he's saying there's an anachronism there. I'm not sure why is TurretinFan using that same type of verbiage, exactly the same verbiage as James White, saying there's an anachronism there. So an anachronism is just basically Anna sort of means out of, and a chronos is time. So it's something out of whack. It's like saying, Abraham Lincoln said, "Don't believe everything you hear on YouTube." It's an anachronism. It's something that's out of time. It doesn't fit. But why would Passover not fit there? I mean, even if TurretinFan had his finger on the pulse and really knew about these issues, he would even look at a book like Don't Pass Over Easter by Bryan Ross, where he gives a different answer to what I would give. But in my articles, I basically prove Bryan Ross's point up until the Bishop's Bible. Then I say no, that the King James Version, they tidied up the semantic range of Easter, and so they didn't use it for the Passover as a synonym anymore, and that's why we don't do that today either. It had to start somewhere, so it started with the King James, and so these guys sort of think it started just, I don't know, about the 18th century and just sort of morphed into, okay, we've got separate, we don't use Easter anymore for the Jewish Passover, and it's like, no, that was already something that was happening in England. The King James translator solidified that, and so but I don't know why people just want to fight against it. And also, there is a huge Puritan movement against that in a lot of writings, where people are just saying, "Oh, Easter is." They start saying Easter is a pagan goddess, and they start saying this type of nonsense early on. So I sort of traced it back to Hislop. That was sort of like, okay, Hislop's talking about this, but then you go back to Adam Clark, and you go right back to the 17th century, and there are commentators talking about this, talking about these issues. They're talking about Easter being a pagan festival, and it's like, so that was already creeping in among Bible commentators, and so oftentimes these people were not friendly with King James and not friendly with their choice of Easter there, and some people were saying you shouldn't celebrate Easter, you shouldn't celebrate Christmas. So the Puritans were saying that. And so what I find is sometimes when I'm coming up with people who have a reformed bent or a confessional bibliology type of bent, these guys sometimes are just adopting that stance. Well, we don't think Easter is something you should celebrate. And even sometimes Easter happens and people are like, how was your pagan Easter? And it's like, and you wonder why they can't get beyond that. But it's because they have this presupposition. It's a denominational presupposition that people have. It's like reading, baptism of children, infant baptism into stuff. They see it, they defend it, and it's like you're trying to prove against it, but they've got this bias, and they're going to have that bias, and no matter what you say, it's not going to change their mind. But at least TurretinFan, he seems to have sort of said that it's not a pagan festival. Okay. And so to me, that's like, oh, phew, we don't have to deal with that rubbish. That usually critical text people are dealing with that rubbish, and you're going through Ishtar and Ustar and all these other ways of saying it, and it's related to a Phoenician goddess and it's related to a Germanic goddess and blah 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 blah, and eggs and bunnies and talking about sex in Playboy magazine, and it's like, don't they realize they're sounding just like Gal Ripplinger there? You know what I mean? Gal Ripplinger doesn't even say this about Easter. And that's why, people like James White, his book is the Gal Ripplinger equivalent on the critical text side. So Helg says, and of course, he's James White's fanboy, result of years of reading and listening to modern version proponents and apologists. So it's important to avoid using our heads as trash cans. Yeah, and I think, I appreciate the fact that TurretinFan seems to be going through and listening to what I say and examining things and all the rest of it. That's great. But I just find sometimes it's just bog standard James White, discredited stuff. Years and years ago, it's been discredited. And so I think as he goes, because some of these things I know he didn't know much about, because he's admitted it. He's like, well, I don't really know much about this, and let's have a look, sort of thing. And then he's using it as a debate point. But then he's coming along later on, he's learning this stuff, where most of this stuff, most of the stuff of substance that he's talking about, not, a print error in the King James. When he's talking about Revelation 16:5, when he's talking about Easter, and these are things I've studied out. You would think that he would come to the plate having watched all my videos on that, my old videos, read my articles that I did like back in 2005 on Easter, 2007, and I think it was 2009, and my videos that accompanied that, but it just, I guess in a way, he's just sort of learning these things as he goes, and that's fine. But to have full debate on something, you usually come learned and knowing your stuff, or you point to someone who does know this stuff. And he couldn't point to James White here because he's talking about a pagan thing, but he is using the same terminology of anachronistic, and I thought I'd point that out.
And this was done in Book of Acts. Let me give you the exact citation. The citation is Acts 12:4. And let's quickly read the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 12, and I'll read verses 1 through 5 to provide the context. Without, we could read even more, but let's start with that. So the context is this. Now about that time, Herod the king stretched forth his hands to vex certain of the church, and he killed James, the brother of John, with the sword. And because he saw it pleased the Jews, he proceeded further to take Peter also. Then were the days of unleavened bread. And when he had apprehended him, he put him in prison and delivered him to 4 quaternions of soldiers to keep him, intending after, this is where the King James puts Easter, but it should say Passover, to bring him forth to the people. Peter therefore was kept in prison, but prayer was made without ceasing of the church unto God for him. This is God's word. The the issue of Easter is an issue that came up a few times in my debate with Nick, and I think it might be valuable, perhaps it might be valuable to go through some of those references. I'm not sure, but there might be value in that, to go through the places where Nick has discussed Easter and where he has made various claims about Easter. So I'm trying to think what's the best way to do that. The best way to do it might be just to go to the actual debate where we had this.
Okay, so he goes to the debate, but unfortunately, like I have these issues too, the sound didn't work. He didn't really check the sound. And so, but he does say some things here. So I'm going to fluctuate in between speeds because I want to try and speed this up a little bit.
Contention between us. So let's see. I think that I've timed everything up here for the debate at the right place. And I'll try to respond and go through Nick's claims. And I believe this is the best part of the debate to address, but I will double check if there's some other part or I have some other notes. I'm happy to go through and try to address any of the other arguments that he had. And if for some reason I haven't captured the best part, I guess I'll do a later episode to try to catch anything I've missed here. But feel free, if you're watching, anyone who's watching, I see there's several people watching and already, feel free to add your comments. As always, or as nearly always, audience questions are, or even just comments or criticisms are welcome. Well, let's continue on, and let's see if we can catch the critical moment here in the debate.
Okay, so I'm supposed to be talking.
So if I recall correctly, this is from the portion of the debate where Nick is responding to my assertions, but well, I think this was from his, I'm not sure. Well, I'll have to double check where exactly it's from, but it's from 46 minutes into the presentation. You can find it Standing for Truth. So he says it's like saying the Jewish feast of Tabernacles. This surprised me, this particular argument. It's like saying that. Well, actually, and this is the really puzzling thing. Yes, it's the Passover of the Jews, but why is that being mentioned, that it's the Passover of the Jews? Well, the short answer is that John's primary audience aren't Jews. So
yeah, and so that's exactly it. And so because I know that I'm going to have to cut this short, and I know that what happens about the 20-minute mark, maybe what I should do, I'm at 6 minutes and 16 here. I should just fast forward it and we actually listen to what I said there, because he realizes that the audio wasn't working. So this will give you a little bit more context of what I said. Okay. Okay, the Greek word. So
I do hear him. Patrick, I noticed that you said you can't hear him. So, okay, now it works now. All right. Well, let me back up then. And let's see if I'll go back a little bit and play Nick's words instead.
Word is Pascha. 5 has an Passover. Won't be 1 second. Okay, so John 2:13 has, and the Jews' Passover was at hand. John 11:55 has, and the Jews' Passover was at hand. Now, why would John put the Jews' Passover? It's like saying the Jewish festival of the Feast of Tabernacles. Why would he put that? Obvious.
So I hope you caught it that time. He says it's like saying the Jewish Feast of the Tabernacles, and he's right that it is like that. But the problem is John also does that, which just demonstrates that his assumption that comes next about obviously this and that is mistaken.
Okay, so this is the main point I want to make in this video. Okay, so if we look at, I might just grab my online Bible here. Now, if I go, say Passover. So this just shows everywhere the English word Passover appears. Now, I might just go to the Strong's number and we'll get the actual word Passover in the Greek. I'll make this nice and big for you guys. And so the thing is, let's make that big here. Okay, so Pascha. And let's search for Pascha. That appears. So the main thing is when you go through, it's translated Passover every time except for once in Acts 12:4 where it has Easter. Okay, so what you find if you look at all the old Bibles, beginning from Tyndale all the way through, you'll find that sometimes it had Passover, sometimes it had Easter, all the way through this. So they weren't really consistent with it, and these words were pretty much synonymous. But then when it came to 1611, they put it only once in Acts 12:4, because in Acts 12:4, it's the only place which is after the resurrection. So you can see here it's John, and other places in Luke and all the rest of it. And so it's obviously talking about the Passover going before the cross. Okay, so in Acts chapter 12 verse 4, this is many years after the cross. Now these other places, 1 Corinthians, it's talking in retroactively talking about Christ our Passover is sacrificed for us, like Tyndale has Christ our Easter lamb. Hebrews 11:20 says though he kept the Passover. So it's talking historically about the Old Testament, these two verses. So the only verse that really warrants a New Testament feast is here. So that's why Easter is a New Testament feast. So even today, if you were to say to someone, what's Easter? Well, it's a New Testament feast, the resurrection of Jesus Christ. If you were to ask what's Passover? Oh, it's the old Passover of the Jews. You wouldn't say Passover is Easter or Easter is Passover, but they used to say that during the Reformation period. And so what happened in 1611, they tidied all these type of issues up. And so it's very clear, it's very basic. So what happens is we can see there are these things where it has the Jews' Passover, okay? And so obviously this is showing that John was talking to a Gentile audience, because in the Greek, now I might even be able to do a parallel Greek here. I'm pretty sure if you press F9. Yeah, here we go. Parallel Bibles. Oh, it doesn't have any parallels. I used to load this right up with all Greek Bibles and everything, so I don't have it there. But basically, just take my word for it, so I don't have to do all the searching. But it's basically just the Jews' Pascha. Okay, so everywhere it has Pascha, or even that one place in Easter, it's Passover, and the one place of Easter, it's Pascha is the Greek. So it has the Jews' Pascha was at hand. Why would it have the Jews' Pascha? Well, obviously there was a Greek Pascha going on. There was a Gentile Pascha going on, where people called this time the Pascha, just like the Jews did, and it was at the same dates of the Passover. But the Christians celebrated it differently. They didn't kill a lamb. They didn't go to the temple. They didn't do all these things. They did it. They did it according to Jesus said, do this in remembrance of me. And so Jesus said, do this in remembrance of me, in a sense of that usurps the old shadow for Christians. Sure, Jews are going to practice their stuff forever. And obviously they're redundant now because they're shadows and types. But the fulfillment is Easter. Easter is the fulfillment of the Passover. Easter is the celebration of the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ. And so it also says, and Passover, a feast of the Jews, was nigh, John 6:4, in 11:55, and the Jews' Passover was. So why is he saying this? He's saying it's the Jews' Passover because he's specifically making a distinction between the Jewish Pascha and what the Greeks had begun to celebrate, the Pascha that they celebrated. And so obviously John is he's not talking to Israelites here. He's talking to Jews. He understands that some of the things in their customs and culture that they don't understand. And so he's saying, well, this is the Jews' Passover. So this is the Jewish Pascha. I know you guys celebrate your Pascha, Easter, that will be called Easter later on in English, in 1600 years, but it's like at the moment we're calling it Pascha. In all the early church writers, they use the word Pascha interchangeably for either Easter or for Passover. So when you're looking at the voluminous writings of someone like Chrysostom, he's talking about the Quartodeciman controversies, and he uses the word Pascha for both Easter and for Passover. He might say the Jews' Pascha, like John does. So you only do that because you're trying to make a difference, because the word has two meanings now. After the cross, it's got two meanings. And that's clearly obvious. And I don't know why Turretin fans are like, there's no real record of this. For me, there's biblical record of this. Now, I'm probably going to shake a few cages here. But so let's just go to 1 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians chapter 11. Okay. Okay, so here it's talking about the Lord's Supper. Now, obviously, I've said to TurretinFan that Jesus initiated the Lord's Supper on the Passover day, on the 14th of Nisan. So the sun had gone down, the 14th of Nisan had started. He was sitting around with his disciples. Judas was heading off to betray him and all the rest of it. So he started to initiate the new Pascha that was to be celebrated by the churches. What's happened is, because the Roman Catholic Church had the Eucharist, and you have to sort of do it every week or else you're damned. You have to crucify Jesus every Sunday. What's happened is this has gone into a lot of the churches. And so if you go to the Anglican church, they'll do the communion weekly. And so some churches do it weekly, but then you get some churches and they do it monthly, but they still believe just as strongly in communion. But then some churches don't hardly do it at all. And some do it, maybe whenever there's a special thing happening, or Easter time. And so for me, from all my studies, there was this theme that was sort of in the background that I cottoned onto, that they only did Easter and they only did communion once a year at Easter. And so I know that if you read modern versions, say if you read the Amplified version, they make out that they did communion daily. They went house to house breaking bread and having communion. It's sort of that this is the Amplified Bible reads that into it. And so instead of, they're breaking bread, they're just, if you've been in the Middle East, if you have a roti, it's a flat bread, it's unleavened bread. It's not like our bread, which, right, it's quite amazing. They have a picture of Happy Easter, and they have this leavened bread and alcoholic wine. Both of them have fermentation. They have yeast in it, which is the unleavened bread. Leaven is yeast. It's like both of those have the effects of yeast in it. It's so weird that Christianity has this mentality. So you'd have a flat bread, unleavened bread, and you would have grape juice because it doesn't have fermentation in it, because you've gotten rid of all the leaven out of your house. It's sort of almost like a no-brainer, but you have to explain these things sometimes. And so the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Now, where was I going with that? Okay, so the early church, they were told by Jesus, do this in remembrance of me. He got a cup, passed it around, got the bread, passed it around, broke bread and all that sort of stuff. Now, a lot of versions are trying to squeeze this Catholic thing of having it regularly in there. And we're going to look at the word oft, because he does bring this up. But so it has here, now I declare to you, I praise you not, that you come together, not for the better, but for the worse. So they're coming together. Well, they would normally be coming together for church. But this seems like something different. Listen to this. First of all, when you come together in the church, I hear that there are divisions among you, and I partly believe it. For there must also be heresies among you, that they which are approved may be manifest among you. When you come together, therefore, into one place, this is not to eat the Lord's Supper. For in eating, one taketh before other his own supper, and one is hungry, another is drunk. It doesn't mean drunken, sloshing around. It means, like I was saying before, it means you have well filled with liquids. That's all. People just read these. They don't even look up these words, and they lazily just create doctrines around these. What, have you not houses to eat and drink in? Or despise ye the church of God, and shame them that have not? What shall I say unto you? Shall I praise you in this? I praise you not. For I have received of the Lord that which also I delivered to you, that the Lord Jesus, the same night in which he was betrayed, took bread. And when he had given thanks, he brake it, and he said, "Take, eat, this is my body which is broken for you. Do this in remembrance of me." After the same manner he took the cup, and when he had supped, saying, "This cup of the New Testament in my blood, this do ye as oft as ye drink it." We're going to look at that word oft. "In remembrance of me. For as often as you eat this and drink this cup, you do shew the Lord's death till I come. Wherefore, whosoever shall eat this bread and drink this cup of the Lord unworthily shall be guilty of the body and blood of the Lord. But let a man examine himself, and so let him eat of that bread and drink of that cup. For he that eateth and drinketh unworthily eateth and drinketh damnation to himself, not discerning the Lord's body. For this cause many are weak and sickly among you, and many sleep. For if we would judge ourselves, we would not be judged. But when we are judged, we are chastened by the Lord, that we should not be condemned with the world. Wherefore, my brethren, when ye come together to eat, tarry one for another. And if any hunger, let him eat at home, for ye come not together unto condemnation. And the rest I will set in order when I come." And then he talks about spiritual gifts for 3 chapters. And so what does this mean? Usually you come into church to have church, not to have a big feast. These guys, the Jews, were having their feasts, the Passover. They were constantly doing that. Now, the temple was destroyed and everything like that, but they're still doing Passover. Now, today they have like a lamb shank bone and a few other little bits and pieces, and there's this whole story behind it. And it's a lot of Christian stuff's actually snuck into the Jewish way of doing things. But when you go through this, it's quite clear that they're coming to church to have a massive feast. And some people are eating and some aren't, and some are hungry, and it's like you're eating before you come, and they're having a big party at home, and then they're coming to the. So this is the Pascha that I'm talking about. This is the celebration of the Easter. Now I know that retroactively in our minds we think no, communion that's Sunday. Sunday is because the Roman Catholics say you're going to hell if you don't believe that. So obviously that's going to have an effect when half the world is proclaimed as Catholic, and if you don't believe their doctrines, you are burnt at the stake with your Bible. But this has crept into other more traditional denominations, and then I haven't really been involved in a lot of those denominations, and a lot of churches don't do it. So I've been to churches where they have it every week, okay, and then I've been to other places where they have it like once a month. It's sort of like, it's a time of communion, and I've even done one of them. They're like, "Nick, come up and do a communion." It's like, okay, and I just preach on the blood of Jesus or something. But I discovered this many years ago, that this is talking about Easter. This context is Easter because it's talking about eating. But why are they having this massive feast at church? You don't do that. The church, and when it's saying, they went from house to house breaking bread, that's when there were house churches and things like that. And of course, these are probably still house churches. They've probably just gotten bigger and bigger. But when in the book of Acts, yes, they're going together daily breaking bread, but that just means they're eating. What else are they going to, if they broke something else, that they had a bowl of rice, okay, they're not having communion then. Why? Just because it has bread there, do we read communion into that? That's because modern Bibles have squeezed this in, the whole concept of, give us this day our daily bread. And we know that the Catholic Bibles were saying, give us this day our transubstantial bread, or something like that. I've said the word wrong, but they were putting these things into the Lord's Prayer. I mean, that's bad enough. That's so bad. So that was back in the Reformation period. So these guys have been squeezing, got to have this, thing, but that's daily. So this is saying daily you've got to have this, okay? So usually you go through and you and ah about all this, and it comes back down to this thing here: as oft as you drink it, okay? So I might even go to 1 Corinthians 11:25. I'll just see if I've got anything written on my website. TR.org.au. Um, 11. And 25. As oft as you drink it. So in the 2016 update, I've got do this each time you drink it in remembrance of me. So it's not talking about do this often. That's how it usually gets read. Oh, see, as often as you drink it, you can do it often. What daily? What 4 times a day, or once a week, or once a month, or once every 2 months, or as often. It's like, oh, okay, so we got to do it often. No, it just understanding what it's saying here when it says, "This do ye as oft as ye drink it in remembrance of me." So I've got this do each time you drink it in remembrance of me. Okay, so it's talking about the cup. Now, okay, so I'll just see if I've got any commentary there. I don't, unfortunately. I thought I did, because I did do quite a big study into the word oft here. So I'll just do a little bit of one. Let's just press S, and the Strong's numbers come up. And there's oft. Okay, let's look at the word oft. As often as, or as often soever as. So, all right, let's look at the usage. Okay, so there's only, it's in the same context, but it's in Revelation. It says, and to smite them with all the plagues of the earth as often as they will. So when it's saying as often as you drink it, or as often as you eat this bread, which I've got, no, I actually just closed that page. Sorry about that. But as often as you eat this bread. So it's basically like me saying, so as often as you have Christmas, remember the birth of Christ. So in other words, yearly remember Christ. Okay. And so this do ye, I might actually have to get my page back up that I closed. Okay, so history. Okay, here we are. This do ye as oft as you drink it in remembrance of me. This do each time you drink it in remembrance of me. So each time you drink it, remember me. Do this. Have the cup. This is the New Testament in my blood. Do this each time you do it in remembrance of me. So every time you do this, so it's just saying, like, every time you do this, do it in remembrance of me until I come back. So when are we going to do it? Well, we're going to do it when Jesus initiated it, which was the Passover night. And so it just seems strange that the Passover occurred once a year, okay? And specific 14th of Nisan, that's when it starts. It's the feast. And you go off to, the Feast of Unleavened Bread and first fruits and others. And so why would we assume that the Pascha of the New Testament is going to be weekly all of a sudden? And so this tends to come up with, because there's a whole bunch of issues, because this Easter issue, it comes against this whole thing of a weekly communion. I don't mind if people do it. I've been in churches where they do it, and I've had this concept in my mind, and I've listened to each and every communion, and no one has pointed out where in the Bible that they have to do it weekly. But then it comes to, like, oh, what about the Lord's Day and Sunday? Sunday is the new Sabbath. So this is where some Reformed churches are like, okay, Sunday's the new Sabbath. So instead of having the Saturday Sabbath, they've put it onto Sunday with a bunch of rules. If you watch a movie like, say, Chariots of Fire, the whole thing's about keeping the Sunday Sabbath. So a lot of Reformed people are like, no, you have to keep the Sunday like a Sabbath. It's like the Jewish Sabbath. And you can't work on that day and you can't do anything on that day. This is the holy day. But Paul was very clear. It's one day. Some people esteem one day above another. Some see every day alike. Let each be fully convinced in his own mind. So he's saying there's no real set thing here. You have liberty. And so I find it legalistic, almost like Seventh-day Adventists, to grab the Sabbath and to obey a Sabbath, but just put it on a different day. It's like, oh, well, it's Sunday. And I'm not saying that people didn't gather together on a Sunday, but when you actually, I don't keep really any day. Every day to me is exactly the same. And so it's taken me years to get out of that mindset of the denominational Roman Catholic type of mindset. Well, I know they gathered together on the first day of the week to break bread, and it was Sunday, and that's usually when they did it. To most of the time to commemorate the resurrection, and I'm like, yep, cool. It seems they did that every week, but then there's way more references to Paul going to the synagogue on a Sabbath. But there's dozens and dozens and dozens. Now, I know he was doing that to convert people, to convert the Jews. But at the end of the day, it depends what culture you're in. Like when I was in Pakistan, they have Friday off because they're a Muslim country. And so people just work Saturday and Sunday like it's Monday and Tuesday. But then you got people, they have that day off because they want to go to church. And so that can cause problems when you're employed by Muslims. And so obviously this opens up a whole can of worms. And so people might be looking at me now like, oh no, Nick's like that. It's like, well, hear me out, listen to what I've got to say, because I'm obviously rushing and going through these things very quickly. Now, we're at the 10 o'clock and 13-minute mark here. I've gone for about an hour. So what I might do, I might stop this and we all head over to Standing for Truth. And this will just be part one. And I will continue on from where I left off, talking about the Feast of Tabernacles. But just quickly, the reason why it has the Jews' Feast of Tabernacles is because of what Plutarch was talking about, and the whole concept of the Greeks, the non-Jewish converts to Judaism were saying this was related to Dionysus. And so it's very clear if you look at history. So I might just quickly go through that. And so I've got another Balabolka type thing. So I'll just go to number 2, rate 2 here. Listen to this.
Dionysus, the cult of the Greek god of wine and fertility. The non-Jews of Alexandria and Rome alleged that the cult of Dionysus was widespread among Jews. Plutarch gives a Bacchanalian interpretation to the Feast of Tabernacles. After the festival called the Fast, the Day of Atonement, during the vintage, the Jews place tables laden with different fruits in booths of thickets woven from vines and ivy. Their first festival is called by them Sukkot, Sigma Kappa Et Nu. A few days later, the Jews celebrate another festival, which one may simply call a Bacchanalian festival. For this is a festival on which the Jews carry fig branches and sticks adorned with ivy and carry them into the temple. One does not know, adds Plutarch, what they do in the temple. It seems reasonable to suppose that they practice rites in honor of Bacchus. For they blow small horns as the people of Argos do during the festival of Dionysus, and call upon their god. Others, who are called Levites, walk in front, either in allusion to Lysios, Lambda Sigma Iota Omicron, perhaps the god who attenuates curses, or because they call out Uius, i.e., Bacchus. According to Plutarch, the subject of the connection between the Dionysian and Jewish cults was raised during a symposium held at Adipsos in Euboea, with a certain Moiragans linking the Jewish Sabbath with the cult of Bacchus, because even now many people call the Bacchi Saboia and call out that word when they perform the orgies of Bacchus. Tacitus too thought that Jews served the god Liber, i.e., Bacchus Dionysus, but whereas the festival of Liber is joyful, the Jewish festival of Liber is sordid and absurd. According to Pliny, Bethshean was founded by Dionysus after he had buried his wet nurse Nyssa in its soil. His intention was to enlarge the area of the grave, which he surrounded with a city wall, although there were as yet no inhabitants. Then the god chose the Scythians from among his companions, and in order to encourage them, honored them by calling the new city Scythopolis after them. Pliny, Natural History 5:18, 74. An inscription found at Bethshean dating from the time of Marcus Aurelius mentions that Dionysus was honored there as Christus. Stephen of Byzantium reports a legend that connects the founding of the city of Rafa also with Dionysus. For the Dionysian foundation legends of cities in the region, see Lichtenberger study. It is wrong to assume, as some do, that Plutarch took his account of the Festival of Tabernacles from an anti-Semitic source, for despite all the woeful ignorance in his account it contains no accusation against, or abuse of, the Jews. It is more likely that Plutarch described the Festival of Tabernacles from observation, interpreting it in accordance with his own philosophical outlook, which does not prevent him, however, from introducing into it features of the cult, the famous Temple of Jerusalem gleaned by him in his wide reading. The description as a whole, however, is of tabernacles as it was celebrated in the Greek diaspora at the end of the 1st and the beginning of the 2nd century CE, and not as it was celebrated in the temple, which had already been destroyed for more than a generation. The festival undoubtedly absorbed influences from the environment, so that Plutarch indeed witnessed what he recognized as customs of the Dionysian feast.
Okay, so I hope you sort of understand that. But basically, what's being said here, so this is on the Jewish Virtual Library, the cult of Dionysus. So you can look that up yourself. And so if TurretinFan watches this, which he seems to do, he watches every one of these, you can see that there is an issue with the Greek Jews and people of the diaspora practicing their Feast of Tabernacles in a completely separate way than the Jews would in the temple, so that people couldn't distinguish between the cult of Bacchus and the Feast of Tabernacles. So they were saying the Feast of Tabernacles is a cult like thing. So this has to do with Bacchus. So if we, if I was looking up in Beza, he says the same thing here. So Theodore Beza, this is in John 7:2, where it has now the Jews' Feast of Tabernacles was at hand. Skinnapigia. The Skinnapigia, so this is generated by Google Translate, but down the bottom here it says, therefore the ignorance of those who read and interpret the Skinnapigia is pitiable. For the rest, he who wishes to hear many nonsense about the subject invented by profane men at the feast of the Jews who worship Bacchus, read Plutarch's book, Sum Poseke Kephala, which means chapter, and Epsilon, which means 5, so chapter 5. So that this is a marginal note in the 1598 of Beza. So he's saying, read Plutarch, he'll tell you about these things. And so obviously this would have been known by John, and John is saying, obviously making a distinction between the Greek Feast of Tabernacles and the Jewish Feast of Tabernacles, exactly what TurretinFan he talks about. So I'll just quickly go through and try and clear this up a tiny bit. Here we go.
So, but let's let him say what he wants to say about this obviously statement.
Saying the Jewish festival of the Feast of Tabernacles. Why would he put that? Obviously, there was another Pascha happening, because in the...
So he says, obviously there was another Pascha happening, and unfortunately for Nick, it's not so obvious that there was another Pascha happening. Now, there is...
It is if you just read through the commentaries of John chapter 7, verse 2, the Feast of Tabernacles. If you read through John chapter 2, chapter 6, and chapter 11, where it has the Pascha, this is obviously talking to Gentiles. Why would he have to make that distinction? It's quite obvious. And so all the examples here are quite easily answered.
Is the use of, and he's going to come to this in a minute. I think I'm preempting something he's about to say. I believe I am. But there is a Pascha usage in modern Greek, just like the way that modern Greek has a word for Sabbath as Saturday, and that has the word for preparation day as Friday, which are adopted, I believe, into Greek. So it's not that there was already an existing Greek tradition, at least as far as I'm aware, although you never know. I might be just assuming things here, but I suspect that these are things that the Greeks adopted because they also, by and large, adopted Christianity, at least outwardly. And the term Pascha in modern Greek refers to Easter, And Easter is a celebration of the resurrection of Christ. It is not Passover. It's not a Christian.
It is Passover. It means both. That's the thing. You say the Jewish Pascha in context. If the Greeks say Pascha, they only use the one word for Easter. But if you said you're happy Pascha, they would say, "Oh, you're meaning Easter." But if you say that, okay, we're going to celebrate a Jewish Pascha, they know, oh, it's a Jew. So that's the thing. The same type of usage that John had is exactly the same type of usage that they have in the modern Bible, in modern Greek. And so that's the only reason why we show many times modern Greek is because things haven't changed. It's been stable all the way through from there. So some people are like, oh, they're using modern Greek, and oh, what idiots, And it's like, well, we're doing that for a reason. If you type in Easter Passover into Google Translate from English into Greek, it is Pascha. That's what Google Translate says. Pascha is Easter and Pascha is Passover. Once you know that, it sort of clears everything up. Exactly how the early church writers had it. Chrysostom, all these other people, they just had this one word and they used it for two different things. English just so happens to have two separate words. So we use it for Easter and for Passover. The context formulates the difference in most other languages, but in Easter, we don't have to do that. We've got a separate word.
Christian Passover. And in the Greek tradition, they don't call it the Lord's Supper, but they have the celebration of the Lord's Supper, which is the Passover, the Christian equivalent of that Passover meal, but it's not held exclusively at Easter, and it wasn't celebrated originally by Jesus on the day of his resurrection. Instead, it was initiated.
No, it was celebrated on the 14th of Nisan, so obviously it's not going to be the resurrection, but people do that there, and so that's why there's the quarter-deciman controversy. People are like, okay, so when do we finish the fast? Because they were that was the whole issue. People were fasting before that, and then they would break their fast, and they would have a celebration, and so
initiated by Jesus on the day or the night before his death. So
it was actually the same day as his death. So Jesus is initiating all those things. Now they're sitting around, they're eating, they're having their thing. The 14th of Nisan starts at sundown. Now, obviously, Judas went out and they thought that he's gone shopping, because all, and so the thing is, that is not, we're going to get into the Sabbath issue soon. So they were actually still on the 13th of Nisan stopped at 6 o'clock that night. The 14th of Nisan started because the Jewish calendar, the Jewish days goes from Sunday to sundown. If you ever work for a 7-day Adventist, you'll find that out really quickly. They can work right up until, is it Friday sundown? And then it's tools down. And then Saturday night at sundown, you can pick them up again. And so, and they've studied this through, and they're correct in a sense of following the Jewish rules. They're wrong. That the thing is, the Sabbath isn't a day anymore. Jesus is our Sabbath. He is our rest. Come unto me, all you that labor and heavy laden, I will give you rest for your souls. For my burden is light, and my yoke is easy.
The idea that Christians were immediately celebrating and calling their celebration by the name of Passover already at the same name. The Greek word is Pascha, but that's just a Grecization of the Hebrew word. So
it makes perfect sense. They're all Jews, so they all got together after Jesus is resurrected, ascended, and they're all Jews for quite a long time until the halfway through the book of Acts, and then it's like Cornelius' household and all the rest of it. But So up until then, they're hanging around Jewish people, they're hanging around non-Christian Jewish people, they're hanging around the temple, they're in Jerusalem, they're doing all this stuff, and these feasts and all that are still continuing. Okay, so what are the Christians going to do? They're sitting around saying, well, what are we going to do with this feast of Passover? Well, remember, Jesus said to do this in remembrance of me. We don't need a lamb anymore. He's the Lamb of God that takes away the sin of the world. Remember, John the Baptist said that. Oh, yeah, getting all this revelation. And so they're having the same holidays, the same days off, the same as the Jews. So Pascha was the one thing that they followed through, and they kept observing that. And so church historians understand this. Alfred Erdeshim, many of these people are like, well, the very next year, after Jesus died on the cross, the very next year, the Christians would have got together and celebrated their Pascha. I can't see why that is a strange thing, because what do you think they did that year? Just nothing. They just sat around and went, well, we're not going to do any of these feasts. I don't know. We'll have a holiday. We'll skip out of Israel for a couple of days and we'll come back. No, they would have been there among them. They're celebrating, and they would have been celebrating with them, but differently, as Christians. This is the whole thing. And then later on, retroactively, the Greeks are calling it Pascha, and it's translated Pascha because up until then it would have been the Pesach, the Hebrew name, and so they're celebrating this. And so Luke understands this because he's been celebrating this for years and years with them. And that's why he has Pascha there, knowing that the Jews are celebrating it their way and the Christians are celebrating it their way, depending on your perspective.
We will, he says, obviously there's another one going on, but there isn't obviously another Feast of the Tabernacles going on. There wasn't obviously another.
But like I was saying, the Feast of the Tabernacles, there was another Feast of the Tabernacles happening, which was by the Greeks, which was to do with Dionysus and Bacchus. And so Plutarch talks about this. I mean, as I was showing you before, this is something Theodore Beza has in his notes here. He says, for the rest, he who wishes to hear many nonsense about the subject invented by profane men at the feet of those who worship Bacchus, read Plutarch's book. So he's like, Plutarch explains this. And so this is Theodore Beza's annotations at John chapter 7, verse 2. So clearly showing why, and he's explaining why it has the Jews' feast. Okay, so I'm going to try and hurry it up. I know I said I'd hurry it up, but I've just got one more thing to talk about, and then I'm going to shut it down. So he talks about the day of the week, the preparation day.
Preparation day going on. He's throwing out this word obviously, but it's not at all obvious. I think it's maybe what he'd like to be, but it isn't in fact obvious. Heffen says, John's constructions are simply over specification.
No, there's a reason why he said the Jews this, the Jews that. And so
sure. They are over specification, but they're there for the non-Jewish reader to make sure that they understand what's going on.
Greek, it's the Greek word is Pascha. So
that part I do agree with from what Nick said.
Greek speaking church, people who spoke Latin in Rome.
These are two different groups, Greek speaking church and people who spoke Latin in Rome. These are two different groups, and it's unclear where he's going to go with this, but let's hear where he goes.
They were celebrating this festival that Jesus initiated.
So
the reason that I said that was because this is to do with the Quartodeciman controversy. So the Latins and the Greeks, that they had this distinction where some were on the 14th, they were being quite legalistic about it. Some were on the what would be the 17th, or a representation of the 17th in Jesus's death week, which could sort of, the Sunday could come at any time after. So the Passover could land on the 14th. It could be sort of like a Tuesday, so the following Sunday was usually the day they celebrated on. So that was what was finalized at the Council of Nicaea. So that's why I'm talking about the Latin and Greek there.
So the claim that Nick Sayers is saying is that Jesus initiated a festival. Now, if they want to say that Jesus initiated a festival, if Nick wants to say this, either he has to say that Jesus initiated something by instituting the Lord's Supper at the same time as Passover.
Exactly.
And therefore setting up an annual celebration of the Lord's Supper.
Yep.
But the early church doesn't, none of the historical records from the early church reflect this idea of a single annual celebration of the Lord's Supper.
It just depends. If you've already got this mindset that it has to be a weekly thing or a monthly thing, or if you have the mindset where you're like, okay, does that fit in with the yearly thing? You can see it everywhere. It's because of a denominational type of blindness where it's an overhang. It's the Reformed weren't reformed enough. They got reformed to a certain point, and then it's like Roman Catholicism had a huge sway over the minds of many. And we know people like Calvin, he was basically steeped in Roman Catholicism, and then it wasn't a few years later he's writing his institutes. Now, I'm not saying he doesn't have some good stuff there, and a lot of he was influenced by Erasmus quite a lot, but there is some overhang. We can admit that with Luther. We go, okay, Luther still believed this type of thing. I just see it with Calvin. I see it with a lot of the reformers. They still had this overhang of Catholicism that didn't go far enough. Okay, into the liberty that's in Christ. That it's not a day. Jesus is our Sabbath. We enter into His rest. You strive to enter into the rest. What is that rest? It's Jesus. It's not a day. And so, Paul's very clear. Don't judge someone if they're not having Sunday off or whatever. It's like, people judge other people according to those things. One day is esteemed above another. Some esteem every day alike. Let each be fully convinced in their own mind. But where's the whole, Paul was taking my side here. And so I know it's a hard thing because this is a massive debate. And I understand that. I haven't just come to this position lightly. I've sat there for years and years and years and meditated on this. And I actually didn't bring it up in my early Easter radicals because I knew that some people would repel against what I was saying and go, look, this guy's off the wall. But now it's to the point where my Easter radicals have sort of saturated a lot of people's minds and they're understanding it. And I'm like, well, what about this concept as well? And so then it comes to the whole Thursday concept. I'll try and hurry this up.
On the contrary, the early church documentation seems to suggest rather frequent celebration of the Lord's Supper. And even the New Testament itself, we don't have to go outside the New Testament to find. 11:25 says, after the same manner he took the cup when he had supped, saying, this cup is the New Testament in my blood. This do you, or this do ye, and is in the King James Version, this do ye as oft as ye drink it, in remembrance of me. Now, that word translated oft, I suppose I should double check what word is translated there, oft. Well, it's hosakis, and it's translated as often as. It's only found here, and it's found again in the next verse, for as often as you eat this bread and drink this cup, you do show the Lord's death till he come. And then in Revelation 11:6, these have power to shut heaven that it rain not in the days of their prophecy, and have power over waters to turn them to blood and to smite the earth with all plagues as often as they will. Certainly the implication is not that this is some kind of rare thing, and nor is it the implication that this is just an annual feast. Let me see. Patrick says, Turretin, can you please mention why it's important for John to explain?
Okay, so I'll just quickly go to my Easter article, easterau.com. Okay, so obviously this page is a little bit old, but you can watch my 2 videos that I did, 12 years ago, I guess, now probably earlier. And so we can read the part 2 is where it has the comments from Philip Schaff. He actually said, Easter is a resurrection festival which follows Passover proper and is included in the same festive week. So these are the same things, but usually some people were celebrating on Sunday. The Quarterdecimans were celebrating the first day, like the Jews were, but other people were waiting for the Sunday to break their fast and all that sort of thing. So that became the main distinction between the Christians and the Jews. And so Gerhard Kittel, that good Nazi, he notes, Pascha came to be called Easter in the celebration of the resurrection within the primitive church. So, yeah, Pascha, it was called Pascha, but it meant Easter in the celebration of the resurrection within the primitive church. Okay. Alfred Edersheim, he has, it was to be the last of the old Paschas and the first, or rather, symbol of promise of the new. So it's talking about the Last Supper. A Messianic Jew, Alfred Edersheim, expert on Jewish culture, he says the Last Supper was the last of the Paschas. He clearly knew that every Pascha from the time of the cross was to be the new Pascha and not the old. And so then we've got a few comments here from Schaff and John Owen, but I'd recommend that TurretinFan go through them and read through those. Clearly, people were saying that in the early church this was happening. John Owen says, and there was also a signal vindication of the truth pleaded for in an instance of fact among the primitive churches. So this is John Owen. There was an opinion that prevailed very early among them about the necessary observation of Easter. So no one actually debated about whether you should keep Easter. There was just debate about what date to keep it on. So everyone was doing this. Okay, everyone. So the observation of Easter in room or in place of the Jewish Passover, because it's the same date, same celebration. Okay, for the solemn commemoration of the death and resurrection of our Savior. It was taken for granted by most of them that the observance hereof was countenanced. So that means the Old Testament Pascha became the New Testament Pascha. And in English now we have 2 separate words where they still don't in Greek. It is not rendered necessary to them by the example of the apostles, for they generally believed that by them it was observed. See? It was observed by the apostles. Okay. And that it was their duty to accommodate themselves to their practice. By the later 2nd century, it was accepted that the celebration of Easter was a practice of the disciples and an undisputed tradition. No one disputed this. They're disputing it now. The TurretinFan is disputing it. But John Owen's saying, if you read just church history, you come to these conclusions. That Easter was observed by virtue of apostolical tradition was generally granted by all. Again, Philip Schaff observed, from some hints in the epistles viewed in the light of universal and uncontracted practice of the church in the 2nd century, it might be inferred that the annual celebration of the death and the resurrection of Christ and the outpouring of the Holy Spirit originated in the apostolic age. So this is Philip Schaff. He was part of the revised version. He was friends with Westcott and Hort. Okay, so this is half the time why I put these guys in here, because it's like critical text people are like, oh, we don't trust these other people. It's like, okay, what about this guy, Philip Schaff? Church historian. Yes, he was a liberal, but it's like most people go with what he's saying, who are critical text guys. In truth, Christ crucified, risen, and living in the church was the one absorbing thought of early Christians. And as this thought expressed itself in the weekly observance of Sunday, so it would also naturally transform the 2 great typical feasts of the Old Testament into the Christian Easter and Whit Sunday. The Paschal controversies in the 2nd century related not to the fact, but to the time of the Easter festival. And Polycarp of Smyrna and Aniset of Rome trace their customs to a difference in the practice of the apostles themselves. Okay, so Polycarp, around 120, Polycarp, who was a disciple of John, went to see the Christian leader Anicetus to discuss the proper date of the celebration. Polycarp, a bishop of Smyrna, visited Rome to confirm with him about the controversy on the date of Easter. Those in Asia celebrated on the movable weekday of the 14th of Nisan, the Jewish Passover, while those in Rome did it on the first Sunday after Passover. They decided to let each group continue as they had been doing rather than cause a split. And so then we can read in Eusebius. So I've got a whole bunch of stuff here. So this is in my second article. So I would recommend TurretinFan go through these quotations and prove these guys wrong rather than just saying I'm wrong. And he can obviously see why I'm believing what I'm believing, because I'm getting it from these sources. And so it's, to me, this is very credible. Okay, I'll shut that down. And we'll let him go through the Friday issue.
Explain Jewish things to non-Jews. Jews were a tiny minority in the world at that time. Most people in the world would likely never meet a Jew, let alone understand their traditions or beliefs. They were definitely a minority in the world, and I don't know whether it's unlikely or likely that they would have met a Jew. I just don't know. I think probably outside of big cities, it would have been less likely. But there was a Jewish diaspora all over the place. That said, despite this, so everywhere that Paul went, remember, he would speak to the Jew first, but also to the Gentile. That was his custom. But there were plenty of Gentiles, and a lot of them were not fully familiar with Jewish traditions. And John wasn't assuming this. It's believed that John is one of the later Gospels. By this time, the work of evangelism is reaching farther and farther away from Palestine. It's not just in Jerusalem and the surrounding areas.
Okay, so I'm going to stop it there with what he's saying, because I can't find the bit where he's talking about the Friday, the preparation. Okay, so earlier on he talks about the preparation day. And so basically, well, to cut it short, the Greeks have, in modern Greece, you have the days of the week. And so the paraskive is the paraskivi is the Friday. Okay, so it's the day of preparation. So that's what the Jews called it. So and as TurretinFan said, it's probably influenced by Christianity, that word. Okay, now how early that influence was, it was probably very early. And so this is another place where it clearly says the Jews Okay, so I'll just go down to, I think it's John chapter 19. John chapter 19, verse 42, I'm pretty sure. Okay, so here we are. John 19:42. I'll just go straight there. Says, and there laid they Jesus because, there laid they Jesus, therefore, because of the Jews' preparation day, for the sepulchre was nigh at hand. So it was the Jews' preparation day. So, so the paraskive is the word for preparation, and that means Friday on a modern Jewish calendar. So this is why people are like, oh, Jesus died on a Friday. But and so I'm going to close with this because I want to get over to this debate, and I'm already like 45 minutes behind. The day of preparation that the Jews talked about was to do before the weekly Sabbath. So they were, obviously the Jews, before the Sabbath happened, they would rush around, get everything ready, and then on the Sabbath they would take rest. Okay, so the Jews, they called this the paraskive. And so they were to run around like chickens, and then that was a preparation day, and then they were to have the Saturday off, so that they put that into their calendar in, I guess, respect to the Jewish influence of the Gospels and everything into their culture, and also what the Bible has, because that a lot of the time they're basing everything off the Bible and their language and everything. So it's quite interesting. Learning Greek culture is a very important thing to understanding how the Hebrew culture transitioned into Christianity itself. And so, but after every Passover day, there was a holiday. Just like if we have, we have Christmas, and the next day is going to be Boxing Day. It just follows suit. So every time they had a Passover, whether it was on a Tuesday, the Wednesday was going to be a holiday. Okay, you couldn't. It's a Sabbath. You can't do any. It's just as strict as the weekly Sabbath. So when Jesus died on a Thursday, he died there on the Thursday. The Friday was a Sabbath. And so it was called the Jews' preparation. So it's not talking about the Greek preparation day. So this is the thing. TurretinFan sort of brought up the Feast of Tabernacles, the Jews' Feast of Tabernacles, and the Jews' preparation day to try and say, oh, well, the Jews' Pascha, that, Nick's just saying this stuff, it doesn't really mean anything. But clearly, from what I'm showing here, that the Feast of Tabernacles was co-opted by people in the outside of Israel. There was another type of festival going on that Gentiles were talking about, saying this is bizarre. So John, he makes that distinction. The Jews, this is the one of the Jews, not the Greek influenced one that goes back to Bacchus and Dionysius. And then when it's talking about the preparation day, obviously it's talking about the Jewish preparation day, not the weekly. Or what says preparation, that's the etymology of it. That's it. It's a Friday. And that's an etymological fallacy. What day it was a Thursday. Jesus died about 3 o'clock in the afternoon on Thursday. Okay. Now just count with me. Thursday night, that's the first night. Okay. Friday night is the second night. Saturday night is the third night. 3 nights. Now the days, Jesus died roughly around between 3 o'clock and 6 o'clock. They were rushing to get him in the tomb, remember? Because even here it says they took the body of Jesus, wound it in cloves and spices, as is the manner of Jews to bury. And it says it was a preparation day. They were rushing to do this. It's like the Sabbath is approaching. Quick, run! You haven't got much time. The Sabbath is coming, and so not the weekly Sabbath, the day after the Passover. Once you understand the Passover celebration and what holidays they used to have afterwards, and became the Feast of Unleavened Bread, then you understand what's going on. And so the 3 nights, the Thursday night, Friday night, and Saturday night, but the 3 days, Friday, Saturday, and he rose again on the third day. So it's not exactly 72 hours and then Jesus is there. It's like he rose on the third day. Okay. Because there's actually early in the morning. So, and then you've got to understand Hebrew days start from sunset. So 3 days and 3 nights only make sense on Thursday. Doesn't make sense on a Wednesday. That's a Chuck Missler thing and a few other guys. It doesn't make sense on a Friday. You got Friday night and Saturday night. Where's the 3 days and 3 nights? It's basic math. You know what I mean? And so anyway, I think I've said enough for TurretinFan to do a response to this, but I'm going to keep going through this. I'll try and tidy it up a little bit because he had that mistake of not quoting me. I had to sort of zoom it forward a little bit. So Alec Cox says, Passover in Exodus 12 is by lunar Hebrew calendar of Nisan 14th. Easter's solar calendar. So there is a difference between the two. Acts 12:4, when the days of unleavened bread before Nisan 14. Now that would have been the same festive week. So they would have still been following the lunar calendar of the Jews there. The Apostle John wrote his gospel last, so it is way after 70 AD. Yeah, so that makes sense. About by then, there were a lot of Jewish, Greek intermingling and different words being used by because obviously the Greeks became massively influenced by Hebrew culture, and so there were good things about that. There were weird things about that. But John went out of his way to say the Jews' Pascha, the Jews' Passover, not the Greek one, the Jews' Feast of Tabernacles, not the Greek influenced one, and also the Jews' preparation day of the Passover and the law and all that, not the Greek one that has become Friday. And so and when you go through that explains those verses and why he said those things. It's pretty straightforward. So yeah, thanks for that, Alec. Good comments. Went to take over the Church of Ephesus after his exile in Patmos. So John, he wrote John. Peter and Paul were already dead. Valid Course is a little off topic. If you have time, on the Smart Christian channel, he claims John 3:16 never says whosoever in Greek. Is it true? In no manuscripts. It's implied. Obviously, when you go through how that's been translated over the years, everyone thinks it should be in there. It's only usually Calvinists who make this argument because they're saying it doesn't say whosoever. It's a bit like there are some things that are implied, but you need certain words to make complete sense in when you're translating, and so whosoever needs to be there, or whoever is an equivalent, modern equivalent, and so that's usually a Calvinist argument. Jesus Christ never changed the Sabbath. Jesus Christ is the Sabbath. Sunday is fine. One can worship God every day. Absolutely. I'm in 100% agreement with that. To be continued. So that was like nearly 40 minutes ago. Jesus Christ resurrected on the day of first fruits, not Easter. Yes. So the day of first fruits was the 17th of Nisan. And so that was the Sunday. So that's why people, they call the whole festival Easter, but they also call that day Easter Sunday. That was the day of first fruits, or the equivalent. So what they did, they realized that entering into different calendars and things like that, and now we have the Gregorian calendar, and so these things were like Easter and Passover now have these massively different dates because they go on a lunar calendar. So, but they used to be the same week. So John didn't know what he was doing. No, John totally knew what he was doing. I guess you might be talking about TurretinFan because you're probably commenting along there, hopefully. TurretinFan has not studied this very much, I think. He just throws himself into it without really knowing too much about it. He should at least have given it the benefit of the doubt, but he doesn't. And that's fine. I don't expect people to go down this rabbit hole as much as I've done. I'll debate anyone in the world on this. And I've had David Crystal, the world-leading expert on the English language. He read through my first Easter article and said it was good. And he gave me a whole bunch of pointers on Esther, because I had a whole section on Esther, E-S-T-R, and he said, no, it's just a different way of saying Easter. Is I was thinking it was closer to Uster. He was saying, no, you're on the right track, but I'm not understanding that in England they didn't have a uniformity of spelling, and so it was very interesting to talk to the world-leading expert on the English language. So here's Mark Ward going through and saying about we need to use the Oxford and we need to do this and that. Well, I was doing this stuff in 2005. That's when I did my first article, talking to experts in the English language, and here Mark Ward comes along, labels us all as King James only, says we're a bunch of dimwits, that we don't know anything, and then says we don't even know how to use the Oxford English Dictionary, and we have to watch his videos to get schooled. And it's just like he's just a clown. Helg says John 3:16 says everyone who, it's the same as whosoever. So yeah, I won't be able to go into that this time. Valid Course says thanks, Nick, and I'm going to bail and join the other video. So we still did a two hour video. I'm like, if it's not 4 hours, it's not long enough. So anyway, that's quite huge. So I'll probably let TurretinFan respond to this. And yeah, thanks for joining us, guys. I'll see you over the debate. I'm going to jump on 1.75 speed and fast forward all the intro material, and I will see you there. God bless you.